did. Looks like Brenda's here. I'm gonna add Brenda to the stream. Um, let's see. Andrew says vocal minorities are the most or more noticeable. Um,
Good evening.
Good
Happy New
evening.
Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Brenda.
Happy New Year, Brenda.
Happy New Year.
What's up to Daniel? Just came in. Happy New Year to you. Many blessings to everybody this year. Iron Charioteer says Michael Heiser goes to school and remains a Christian, but Dr. Josh goes to Hopkins for seriology and becomes agnostic. Why the divergence? Well, I don't necessarily think that the schooling, one way or another, has anything to do with it. I heard there's been a kind of a running joke that we should research the amount of people that go in seminary and see the amount of people that are still Christian after seminary. And all I would say about that is that Christ says, "My sheep hear my voice. Those who have ears to hear, let them hear." I don't necessarily think that something like that is the convincing factor. People are gonna either trust their reason, their reasoning process, and their mind as being the supreme or the um, ultimate judge of arbiter of truth, or they're going to uh, trust in the words of Christ, for example.
Well,
So
do you think that it's related to the you get better educated, you become less religious? That seems to be the
um,
case.
I,
The more you know about the Bible, the less you're going to believe.
I don't think so. And not in my experience. The more I know about the Bible, the more it kind of strengthens my faith.
Yeah, but you're just one person. I'm saying in general. For the general
Um,
on the general case, the more so I would encourage more people to go to seminary to become
I would too.
apologetics because I think that would diminish their faith.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to see some type of study that indicates that because I can't agree with that because I've never seen any studies to back it. But I would just say that, um, I know plenty of people who have went to seminary and came out and still believed. A lot of times, seminary just teaches you how much you don't quite know, and if somebody can't handle that, me personally, I want to know how much I don't know. Like
Well,
that's interesting to me.
I kind of
So,
agree with Doug at Pine Creek that people just believe because they love Jesus, and that as they become more familiar with that apologetics is to help people who have doubts to believe, to keep their belief, and the more you know about apologetics, the harder that becomes.
yeah, I don't think so. Um, I
Well,
do think that.
I'm just agreeing with Doug at Pine Creek. I'm
Sure, sure.
agreeing with him.
Yeah, and I disagree with Doug on almost everything, and it's not just because I dislike Doug or something like that. It's just like all the things that I hear from him almost are like it's just like I believe the exact opposite based on the experiences of my life. Like how he talks about, well, Christians typically become Christian when they're around the age of 20 or 21 or somewhere around that
It
early
seems to be
development.
true. That
I
seems to be
really,
the
in
case,
my
right?
experience, no. In my experience, around the legal drinking age, people don't become Christians. They leave Christianity. The exact opposite seems true to me. That's my thing. It's like seems to be true, but to me it doesn't. The exact opposite in my experience is true that people start trying drugs and drinking and then move on to college and so forth, and because then I'll see atheists that use that same argument and then they'll be talking about they'll use a different argument and go, yeah, but whenever they get to college and start learning, they usually leave the faith and I'm like, wait a second, you can't have both of those. You can either have when they get to college in their early 20s they become Christian or they leave Christianity. You can't have both. So
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So what did you think of Doug's latest video, Pine Tree, that the way to evangelize to naturalists is to repeat the burning of soaked water soaked wood, right? I don't know if you saw his video or not.
No, I haven't watched it yet. I've seen that he put like a clickbait picture of him like with a Pyrex cup on fire or something like that. I didn't watch it though yet. So
Well,
I
he's
don't.
quoting a biblical scene
Mhm.
where I don't remember who it is. Is it Elijah who soaks wood and everything in three times in water, right? And then calls down fire from heaven, and the
Mhm.
fire from heaven consumes the wood, even though it's been thoroughly soaked in water. So he takes paper towels, soaks them in water in a Pyrex glass, and says that this is how you evangelize to naturalists. And I have to agree with him. If somebody could call down fire from heaven and burn up uh, uh, the paper towels in a Pyrex glass, that would shake my faith in naturalism
Mhm.
significantly. And so you could do that.
Well, how I would respond is like if you just like take a verse out of the Bible that says that a prophet, one of the um, main prophets of God, to show God's strength to the prophets of these other gods, performed this miracle task. That means that your standard believer can also perform the same miracles that the prophet, like a prophet of God, can do. I mean,
Oh,
I don't think that would be. It kind of
uh,
seems a little facile.
what's facile about it? Because I would find that highly problematic for my belief in naturalism, and I would be strongly inclined to
I
believe
agree.
believe in the Christian God.
I agree with that. What I'm saying is facile about it is when you go, okay, there's a Bible verse that says that some guy in the Bible did this thing, this formula, and called down, uh, that
He,
did this powerful thing, and
yeah,
then
he called down fire from heaven. I
fire from
think is
heaven.
the
Yeah, I
words
understand.
that are in the Bible. I think those are the words.
Right. But what he was doing in that scene is he was saying to these other prophets of different gods, like, if your God is so powerful, show up, prove it, have it, call down fire from heaven, and then they couldn't do it. So so what he did was he called down fire from God, and then, but what I'm saying is facile about it is to say, well, somebody done that in the Bible, so you should be able to do it. No,
Well,
facile
why
means
not?
because facile means that you don't account for all the complexities of the situation. And here's the complexities: is that was a major prophet of God. They did all kind of things that your standard believer don't do. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't understand if being saved is really that important. That something like that or something similar to that would not be something that would convince a large number of people, including myself, to seriously consider the Christian message, as opposed to, say, for instance, the Jewish or the Hindu or the Islamic gods.
sure. Well, one thing I would say is that I don't think that would convince a lot of people. I think a lot of people would say that they would be convinced by something like that,
Huh,
but then
I would.
whenever it occurred, I mean, you could easily say, look, I watched Chris Angel last week lift a car over his head or walk on water, or Chris Angel does all kind of crazy stuff. He's an illusionist. Um, I don't think that would necessarily convince you that.
Well, we know beforehand that those are sleight of hand and those are illusions. But if a Muslim could call down fire from Allah and light that paper towel that's soaked in water in Doug's Pyrex glass, I would discount Christianity and be strongly inclined to accept the Muslim faith. And the same for any of the Hindu
Can
Sure.
I
gods.
just
If
pitch in there?
Go ahead, Gavin.
Can I just pitch in there? Can I just pitch in there? Brenda, I hear what you're saying, and look, I would, I agree with where you're coming from. I think it's important to remember that supernatural miracles from the biblical God or from Jesus, um, they're not that common in the Bible. And when I say not that common, they're not that common because they're supernatural miracles. For instance, in the entire Bible, from Genesis to the book of Revelation, there's only 9 occurrences, 9, of people being raised from the dead. And sometimes I think it's easy to kind of get a little bit carried away with supernatural miracles and think they were sort of commonplace in the ancient Near East. They weren't. They were extremely rare.
Sure.
Well,
Hence the reason why
well, I think if
miracles.
yeah, I think though, however, that would be how you would evangelize a naturalist, and if they were less rare and more reliable, if it was known that devotees of the God of Christianity could regularly perform these kinds of feats, that would be a strong indication that perhaps what they're saying is true.
Yeah, but Brenda, I think you're kind of missing the point a little bit because
Yeah, I don't. I really don't understand. Help me to understand.
sure. So great point, Gavin. I say the Bible is like ESPN highlights. It kind of highlights the miracles, right? But what I would say is that so Christ saying, "My sheep hear my voice," or "Those who have ears to hear, let them hear." It doesn't matter necessarily. Like I could do something, I could just say one thing, and then it plants some seed in somebody's mind, and then it grows into belief, right? Or I could,
Buffering,
or I could,
buffering,
I could do, I could do something.
buffering.
It's not necessarily the miracles that are gonna convince my. And then I would just say this as well that Christ said there will be no sign for this generation. You know, things like that to say like, you know, people. Does God does not God says knock and the door shall be open. Okay, God doesn't bend to people's will. It's like one of my friends, Tom Jump. He says, "Well, if I could just pray and God would deliver a gold brick every time I prayed, I would believe." The problem is that if God doesn't want to bend to people's will, God wants you to choose to have a relationship with Him, and God will open that door. But God's not going to just bend to your will and go, "Oh, okay, a miracle would convince you. Sure, I guess I'll just do that
Well,
then."
if it's that important, I don't see why not. I just don't see
But
the problem. If my
I agree.
child, if my child was in danger of being terribly hurt, and all that it required was for me to do some small act because I'm vastly more powerful than she is, then I would do it. I don't see the
yeah,
opposition, and I consider myself, I'm a non-resistant non-believer. I'm open to there being a God, but I don't believe. And since belief in the existence of God is something of a tremendous value, I just don't see the problem. And why is God silent?
well, as
I
some
don't think.
philosophers, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I don't believe that he is silent, Brenda, and I don't believe he's somewhat hidden. It's called divine hiddenness, but there's a reason for that. But I think CC brought up a good point about Tom. Tom tends to say things like, and I've got nothing against Tom. I really like him. Tom says, if he prayed for a gold brick, and every time he prayed, God would materialize a gold brick right in front of him in his lap. The problem with that, Brenda, is that you're t- t- in saying that you're imposing your own human conditions on God, if that makes sense. You're 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 asking God to do something according to your own human will, and
Well, yes, I am. I'm asking for evidence, and I don't think that that's too much to ask. I
it's
honestly don't see the big deal.
yeah, yeah. Look, I agree. It's not too much to ask. However,
So
I, I think in all honesty, I think There is a ton of evidence for God.
Well, one way brings up a good Bible verse, Luke 16:31. He said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone raises from the dead. So, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I don't think that seeing something will convince somebody
Well, why
necessarily.
why should I accept bad evidence? Because listening to the Moses and the prophets, well, we know now that Moses most likely didn't exist. So listening to people who never existed doesn't seem like good evidence to me.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I'm going to disagree with you, but I don't say you should believe based on bad evidence.
Well,
Um,
gossip, and word of mouth is bad, and hearsay are bad
no,
evidence.
wait a second, but that no, hold on, wait a second. That verse wasn't written to you or about you. It was written about the people who believed Moses and the prophets were Moses and the prophets, right? And it says if they wouldn't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not even going to believe somebody raised from the dead. It's
Well,
saying
how
like
is
you
how,
you you don't go ahead.
how is that any different than something a Muslim could say? A Muslim could say the same thing. If people don't listen to the prophet of Allah, uh, Muhammad, he could an apologist for the Islamic faith could say the exact same thing. And so
Yeah,
I don't
I
see
agree
from
with that.
from my point of view, I don't see any way of deciding between either of them.
I agree with that. The Muslim could say, "Look, if Muslims don't listen to the Prophet Muhammad, they wouldn't even believe you if you performed a miracle because
Yeah.
they won't even listen to their own prophet." Like I agree with that.
Well, have
But
you
I
listened
don't
to the Prophet Muhammad?
Yeah, sure. I just disagree with when I look at Muhammad and I look at Siddhartha Gautama Buddha and I look at the avatars of Hinduism and I look at Christ and so on and so forth. I choose Christ to be ultimately reliable to tell me about what God has revealed.
Well, how did you decide? Did you roll dice?
No, I decide based on a certain criteria. For one, their
What
lives,
what was
how they live.
what was the criteria?
For one, the first criterion is how they live their life. For example, you brought up Muhammad. Muhammad was a warlord. Muhammad was, he did. For example, he commanded that people could only have four wives, and then he came up with another command that said that only he could have more than four, and things like
Hmm.
this, where it just
Well,
seems like it doesn't meet the
well,
criterion of marriage.
polygamy is in the Bible too.
It's not the four wives thing; it's the fact that he came up with another law that said that he could have more than four.
Well, having more than one wife is something that was practiced by Jews and Christians
Again, that's
in
not the
those
point.
times.
The point's not
Can I
polygamy.
just
It's
jump
the
in
fact
there?
that he came up with a law that allowed him to have more than four wives, and
Yeah,
everyone
so
else could
what?
only have four.
I don't. Yeah, I don't see how
And
that.
then I look at
Can
their
I,
teachings.
can I just jump in there,
Yeah,
CC
go ahead.
and Brenda? Can I
Sure.
jump in there? Um, I came to Christianity and not Islam or not any other religion based on the evidence, and the evidence was the resurrection. Jesus Christ is the only religious leader in mankind's history who was seriously dead. I mean, seriously dead, that came back to life. Nobody else has done that, and the evidence for that.
Resurrecting gods are fairly common throughout, especially at that time. There were dozens of them.
No,
Any citations
Yeah,
no.
to go with
yes,
that?
they were. In that era, under the oppression of the Romans, the Jews were under the oppression of the Romans. There were lots of resurrecting gods. There were a dime a dozen.
Any
And
citations to go with those assertions?
Brenda, look,
Oh,
I'm not disagreeing with you that there might have been they might have been dime a dozen, but the evidence behind
What evidence?
resurrection.
There's no
Yeah. So
evidence.
Well, okay.
There's
Well,
no.
number one, absolutely, there's a lot of evidence. The first thing is the contextual criticism behind the resurrection. It's far more. It's far more than what we have for the works of Homer and Plato, and yet we have no problem accepting that Homer and Plato existed.
You were going to say something about the evidence for the resurrection?
Yeah, yeah.
What is
Well,
the evidence? What is
of,
the evidence?
one of the evidences is the contextual criticism of the New Testament.
Yeah, I don't see how that's evidence.
That, well, when you're talking about ancient manuscripts, the contextual criticism for the contextual. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. The contextual criticism for the New Testament is far, far higher than we have for the works of Plato or Homer. Yet in Western civilization, we don't seem to have any trouble accepting
Uh,
that Plato existed.
we know that Plato wrote the works of Plato. We have no idea
how did you know
who
that, Brent?
who who wrote because I, well,
Do you,
I don't know.
what's the
I'm
closest
not a
manuscript?
scholar. I'm
What's the
not.
closest manuscript of any Plato's writings? What's the closest we've got?
Yeah, I don't know these things. I assume I
They're
base it
not
on
even
other people.
close. They're
I
not
can
even
tell you.
close.
I can tell you. I can tell you, CC.
And we don't know who authored the Gospels.
Absolutely, we do.
No,
We
no,
do.
we don't. No, we
No, we
don't.
do. We
They
do.
have no
We do.
names attached to them.
We
There's
do.
no. No, we don't.
Yeah,
Well,
but
we
we don't
do.
get the names from. Nobody's going to read the work of Matthew at that time. They're not going to go, well, this is the gospel according to Matthew, because at the time, everybody who has it in circulation knows who wrote it. We get the names from the early church fathers, from their writings. They name the people and quote from their sources. As Daniel Wallace has put it, even if we didn't have a single manuscript, we could reconstruct the entire New Testament just from the early church fathers' writings alone. They're quoted. The Gospels are quoted over 1 million
Yeah,
times.
that's over two and
I
three
hate
hundred
that.
years later, right?
No, the early
It's
church fathers.
buffering. It's
Yeah.
buffering.
No,
The
we have.
earliest. I'm sorry. The earliest manuscripts that we have go is a fragment from Mark, and that goes
Yeah,
back to about 70 to 90 um, um,
yeah.
A.D.
Is that 200 years later?
No, that's 90, 70 to 90 years later.
Yeah, because you said.
And that's just a fragment.
But
Anything
I was
else
talking about
comes
the early church
afterwards.
fathers, though. Because,
Yeah,
for example, the John who wrote um, John and Revelation, we have letters from his followers, like people that were his direct disciples, like Polycarp. We have their writings.
yeah. And Polycarp was in the second century BC AD,
Uh,
about
so,
120, 120, 125 or so.
right, but he keep in mind he knows the Apostle John. Okay, do you think the Apostle John might know something about the New Testament, considering he wrote a few of the books that were in it?
Well,
Um,
I'm sort of doubtful that the Apostle John lived to be over 100 years old.
Well, here's something quite
no,
important.
that
Here's something quite important. Can I
go
can I
ahead.
just jump in there? Can I just jump
Yeah,
in
go
there
ahead.
and say this is something quite important, and it seems it seems to be overlooked, and I'm not sure why. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 3 to 7. Now that's been analysed ad nauseum by ancient historians. And there's universal agreement. Well, when I say universal agreement, I'll say there's almost universal agreement amongst atheist New Testament scholars and Christian New Testament scholars that this piece of the gospel was written by Paul or dictated to a scribe by Paul circa AD 30 to 35. So it was basically right at the time of the crucifixion and resurrection. And there's one other thing, and this is really important. There's no official writings or documents from the Pharisees or the Jewish chief priests who had the most to gain by um, refuting the resurrection. There's no official writing refuting the resurrection. There is something called the Acts of Pilate, but that surfaced in the 300 ADs, and it wasn't an authentic piece of literature. It was a forged document. That's the only thing we have, and that was, in the AD 300s. So if you're a Pharisee and a chief priest, and you crucified some guy claiming to be God or be the Son of God, don't you think it'd be in your interest to have some skin in the game and put out some sort of document saying, no, no, there was no resurrection? I'll tell you why. And this is my own personal opinion. I'll tell you why they didn't do that, because they were, I think they were fearful that Jesus would march right up to the Sanhedrin and say, you crucified me 3 days ago and I was dead. Now here I am, alive and well. See the nail marks in my hand?
So you were saying before this started off with my challenging you on any kind of evidence for the resurrection, which is why you said you believe, right? But you haven't yet to give me any evidence at all for the
Well,
resurrection.
I've given you
You've just given me textual criticism, which place with the earliest manuscript we have of the synoptic gospels. It dates to about 70 to 90 A.D. And so you don't have anything.
Yeah, but
yes,
again,
I do.
we
I
don't we
do.
don't just go based off of manuscript evidence. We also go based on off of contextual evidence. We also go based on early church fathers.
Well,
Um,
even if I
for
grant you,
example,
even if I grant you everything, how is any of that evidence for a resurrection?
oh,
Well,
I
there's
you were just critiquing the textual criticism.
Well, that
yeah.
I,
was the only evidence given to me for the resurrection. I could grant you
Well,
everything. I could grant you everything, and you still have no evidence for a resurrection.
there's geographical and there is archaeological evidence, Brenda, as well.
There's no archaeological evidence for resurrection.
There's archaeological evidence that shows, and this was a quote from Dr. Paul M. Uh, Mayer. Paul Mayer. I'm sure you've probably heard of him, CC. But he's quoted as saying 85 to 90% of any discovery that's been made in the biblical lands lines up 100% with what's been written in in the Bible. Now it's very difficult to ignore an 85 to 90% batting average.
Well, I have no idea how that relates to evidence for a resurrection.
Well, it relates in the way that what the Bible is saying um, actually lines up with archaeological
all right,
discovery.
so let me just make a point because I finally found what I was looking for. Brenda, if this, I believe this is correct. If this is correct, so you said that we know that Plato wrote Plato. We have over 6,000 Greek manuscripts and over 20,000 total manuscripts for the New Testament. Plato's writing, we have 7 manuscript copies, and it was 1,200 years after Plato supposedly wrote it, is the earliest that we have for it. So, in
Sure, but they have his name. I don't know anything about this, but do they have his name attached to it?
I have no clue. I would
I
imagine
don't
so.
either.
I would imagine so, but even if it had his name attached to it, it could be a pseudepigraphical work.
I suppose, sure.
So, I mean, I'm just saying that that claim, like, I think the point that Gavin was making is like we have to have a double standard for the New Testament because of the wealth of evidence.
I
Like, for
don't think it's a
example,
double standard at all.
think about the Iliad by Homer. The earliest copy we have is over 500 years removed, and we have less than 600 copies of it. Caesar, the Galactic Wars,
Yeah, but
uh,
none of these,
Gallic
but
Wars.
none of this goes to show that any of the events. So in the Iliad, the fact that it was written doesn't say anything about whether or not they actually went to an island and were and encountered giants with one eye, Cyclops,
No, I
right?
agree with that. I
Or
agree
the
with
or the sheep with the golden fleece, you know.
I agree with
And
that.
so that's what I'm asking for is evidence for the resurrection. Even
Okay,
if
well,
I
I didn't
grant
bring
you,
up.
even if I grant you everything about the Bible, just as I can grant everything about the Iliad, it doesn't go to show that any of the content is true.
Sure. Well, I didn't bring up. I didn't bring up that as as if these manuscripts, if our manuscripts are better, then that's evidence. I mean, I would say that if there is a double standard in historical scholarship based on the New Testament, it would provide some evidence. What I try to do is I try to ask, what's the definition of evidence? And I would say, wouldn't you agree with me? And you've agreed with me before that evidence is anything that lends more to the credibility of something given that piece or that fact or that thing than if we didn't have that thing. Wouldn't you agree?
There is geographical evidence as well, CC
Yeah,
and Brenda.
evidence would be like say a fact, right, that indicates whether or not something
Yes.
is true or not. So I
Yeah,
would need facts that indicate whether or not the resurrection is true. Just like I would need facts that indicate whether or not there was a sheep with golden fleece. The fact that of the Iliad is not go to show that there was a sheep with golden fleece.
sure. But with evidence, you agreed with me that evidence is anything that lends more credibility to the given hypothesis than if you didn't have that thing, right?
Yes, but the existence of the Iliad doesn't
I agree.
lend any support to
Guess
whether
what?
or not any of the events taking place were true. And the same with the Bible. If the
I
Bible
agree.
could be entirely, and you could have documents showing that Mark, Luke, and Matthew and John all wrote the synoptic gospels, shortly after. None of that would go to showing that Jesus was resurrected.
I agree. So my point, that was my point. My point was that was just a premise. Okay, that was just I'm just figuring out, do we agree on the definition of evidence? So
Yeah, yeah.
then I would say that there are, you know, greater and lesser pieces of evidence that lend to credibility of something. So, for example, the criterion of embarrassment in textual criticism, the New Testament passes it with flying colors, unlike a lot of other works, and I would just say that lends to the credibility of the
What
New Testament. So that's
what's what's
evidence.
what's the criterion of embarrassment?
The criterion of embarrassment is that people don't typically write things like, let's say that the New Testament authors were making up the story. They wouldn't make up a story that their leader, all of that his followers, one of them sold him out for 30 pieces of silver, and the other one denied knowing him, and that one of them uh, doubted him after his resurrection. These are embarrassing facts that if you're making up a story about your leader, you don't add those facts, for example. That lends to the credibility. It's evidence that the New Testament is reliable. Now, that is not proof, but I think even Bart Ehrman and others will agree that that's at least some evidence. Now, some people will say, yeah, but it's weak evidence. That's fine. That's just a piece of evidence.
I'm not convinced that it's any evidence at all. The
Well,
fact
let's
that
not.
Judas betrayed Christ would probably actually you know, would be not embarrassing
Yeah,
rather
but
than
Well,
embarrassing.
I gave more than just that.
can we not,
I said all of his
God?
followers. Think about it. One of them did
Yeah,
not knowing him. One of them doubted him. One of them sold him out. All like if I was writing a story about my leader, for example, and I was making it up, for example, I would say, no, everybody that ran into him knew he was the Messiah. Like as soon as you seen him, it kind of struck you in the face. Like this guy has to be the Messiah. He walked around in, he looked like just gold shining all the time. Like this guy, like, and they would make up all these things about him that we don't see. And then the fact that he says some of the things that he says, like it doesn't seem like something you would make up about your leader. So,
CC, yeah, CC and Brenda. I don't think we should forget the geological evidence as well as the eyewitness evidence. In 2012, in Judea, geologists, they were doing excavations, and they found what they considered to be very strong evidence of a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. And they dated it. They because it's 2000, 2000 odd years ago. They can't date it to exactly the day of Christ's
Okay. I can grant you that,
resurrection and
Gavin.
crucifixion. But hang on. I'm almost
I'm
finished.
sorry.
Almost
I'm
finished.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm almost finished. Look, I'm with you, Brendan.
No,
Brenda,
I was gonna.
I used to be like that. But what I'm saying is that they uncovered evidence of a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. Now, an earthquake of that magnitude would have been more than enough to do the damage that was written about in Matthew's Gospel. Split open the tombs and damage the temple and that sort of
Yeah, but
thing.
it's.
But I think we need to be mindful of the eyewitness evidence. The eyewitness evidence, that's important.
Yeah, but
And
the I
everybody,
can.
give this video a like, by the way, while we're talking. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Brent. Just give us a
I.
like.
Yeah, that's fine. Channel stuff is great. I can grant you all of that. None of it goes to show that the dead got climbed out of their graves and walked around. Just like
What?
the fact that New
Sure,
York exists
sure, sure.
doesn't
Yeah,
show that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
yeah. Look. I agree with you, Brenda. But then how do we get it? How do we get around the fact of
Okay.
the eyewitness evidence?
So let me
They're
take
not eyewitnesses. That's gossip. That's hearsay.
so
No, no, it's
let me
not.
take on this
It's not.
point. Let me take on this point that Brenda brought up. So, with for example, with the story of Spider-Man, right?
Well, it's an analogy. It means that the fact that New York exists doesn't mean that the stories
I
about
agree.
Spider-Man in New York are true. Just as the fact that there was may have been an earthquake at that time doesn't show that the stories about that earthquake in Judea at that time are true. Namely, that the dead got up out of their graves and walked around.
Sure, and I can agree with that. But what I would say is that
Yeah, sure.
so you have to look at the narrative as it's being given. So obviously, Spider-Man is written as a work of fiction. So of course we would.
No, it's history. It's history.
No, it's not. It's obviously
Yeah, it
written as
is.
a work of history.
No, it's not.
How do you know?
There's nothing. There's nothing in the
Hey
Spider-Man
guys,
comics
Yeah,
that almost everything in the Spider-Man comics is entirely physically plausible.
but I didn't say it wasn't plausible. I said it's written as fiction.
No, it's a historical record of Peter Parker and how his dad was killed, and then he became Spider-Man.
I'm
That's all
not saying
true. That's all true.
I'm not
guys, I
disagreeing.
think it's
I'm not.
guys. I think is it not hard? Is it not hard to ignore the eyewitness evidence of Matthew the disciple, John the disciple, John Mark, who was the spiritual son of Peter. So Peter was an eyewitness to Christ. So John Mark was getting
Yeah,
his evidence from
there's
Peter.
eyewitnesses to Spider-Man
Hang on,
too. There's eyewitnesses to
hang on,
Spider-Man.
hang on. And also Luke, who was traveling companion of Paul, and he was a physician, so he was meticulous as. And I think we just I think there's sometimes people who are atheists or not believers. Sorry?
Is there an ATM that way?
No, this way. They tend to hand wave away eyewitness evidence. But in US courts today, eyewitness evidence is still admissible, and
Well,
sometimes
there's
a case will turn on eyewitness evidence.
Well, there's lots of eyewitness testimony for the feats done by Peter Parker as Spider-Man. There's lots of eyewitnesses.
And there's lots of eyewitness evidence for the feats done by Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thank you for equating Jesus Christ
Yeah.
with Spider-Man.
So let me just say, Brenda, Spider-Man is not written as a work. It's written as a work of fiction. Um, the obviously the guy who wrote it,
So,
Stanley, says that it's a work of fiction. It's not claimed. So, for example, It says, it's when Luke's writing, for example, in the New Testament, he says something like in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea, and Herod was the tetrarch of Galilee, and Itrachonitis, his brother Philip was the terror, and he goes on through like this whole long thing where he lists out all these people and all their titles, and then it says in that year this happened. Um, Spider-Man is obviously so. I would just say that we take things based off of like there's certain criteria when you take a writing that you need to base it off of. You need to ask, are there internal contradictions? You need to ask, is it what type of narrative is it? Is it historical narrative, or is it myth, or is it what genre is it? And then you need to ask other things like what type of manuscript evidence do we have for it? What type of archaeological evidence do we have for it? There are many. There are the criteria which you judge written works based on, and so I just, you know, I would just say that, you know, I take evidence in pieces, and I say, um, for example, let's just say, for example, the order of the universe. I would say, if there was a God, I would expect the universe to follow certain laws. I would expect nature to be orderly and follow certain mathematical laws, for example. Now we find that. So I
Yeah,
say it leans toward the credibility that
that's affirming the consequent.
it's affirming the consequent to make a prediction and see that it's the case.
Yeah, that's affirming the consequent.
And
So
you wait a second. Are
so
you're saying that what are you saying that's fallacious logic to say
on
if
Christianity we expect
no, not on Christianity, just on belief in God. Like if there were
okay.
a God,
If
things
God
would be
exists,
orderly.
we expect Q. We find Q, therefore God exists. That's
No, no,
affirming the
no.
consequent.
That's not my see. I would disagree with that because I didn't say therefore God exists. I said therefore there's a piece of evidence for God. I said I take my whole thing was I said I take evidence in pieces. For example, if God, if God did create the universe, I would expect there to be order. There is order. Therefore, I would say that lends to the
Yeah,
credibility that God created.
that's still affirming the consequent.
Okay, so if you take a scientific hypothesis and you say, well, if my scientific hypothesis is correct, I would expect this. Then you find that and you go, well, it's affirming the consequence, so I guess I can't use it. What? How does that make any sense?
Yeah, science uses modus tollens and not modus ponens. It doesn't affirm the consequent. It denies the consequent and therefore falsifies the antecedent.
Wait a second. You're telling me that people don't look for what they would expect from their hypothesis?
Yeah, they do, but that if their expectations are not confirmed, then it falsifies rather than confirms.
No, say that one more time.
It science works on the principle of falsification, which is which is that uh, negative evidence would tend to falsify a proposition, but not confirm it.
Yeah, but it says okay. So affirming the consequence is a formal fallacy of taking a true conditional statement and invalidly inferring its converse, even though the converse may not be true. What part of the converse do you think is not true about that?
So scientifically, I would say that um, if it rains, the street will be wet. Uh,
Hmm.
the street is not wet, therefore it has not rained.
Okay, but
That would be how science works by falsifying the antecedent.
wait a second. Wait a second. Let's take that first part of your statement.
If
If
it
it rains,
rains, the street will be wet.
it will be wet. Then you see the street is wet, and you go, "Well, the street is wet." Are you
No,
saying that's not science?
No, I can't. If a street is wet, I can't conclude that therefore it has rained. That would be affirming the consequent.
Well,
But
not
instead,
necessarily.
I'm sorry, what?
I said, well, not necessarily, but you could conclude that.
Yes, necessarily you cannot. It's a fallacy. You can't conclude that it has rained based on the evidence that the streets are wet. You can't. That's a false conclusion.
Wait, if it you say, all right, my hypothesis is if it rains, or if it rains, the street will be wet, and then you walk outside and you see, well, the street is wet.
Yeah, and then I cannot conclude that it has rained because that's affirming the consequent. The way science works, it says I go outside and the street is dry, and therefore I conclude it has not rained.
What? You're saying that if the street's wet due to science, you can't confirm with science that that it rained when the street's wet.
Correct.
Now,
Correct.
are you just saying that it could be because somebody could have sprayed water on it? Like there
Yeah.
could be other
Yeah.
conditions? Well,
Yeah.
I agree with that, but you're making it out like it couldn't be rain.
No, I'm making it out that the antecedent is not necessarily follow.
Well, I agree with that. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily follow.
Yeah.
That
That's the
wasn't my
whole
point.
point.
Okay, well
That's
that
the whole
wasn't
point.
okay. Well, I can agree with that. That wasn't my point at all. My see, that would be proof. I didn't say proof. I said it lends credibility or evidence to the fact. So I said if God, if there were a God, I would expect that things would be orderly. And then I said the fact that things are orderly lend credibility to the fact that God exists, not prove. It could necessarily be something else that I don't know about. But I'm just saying that it could lend evidence to the fact because I expect that that's a prediction I'm making.
Yeah, but there any prediction that cannot be the consequence of belief in God, of God?
Is
I
there
mean, there
any
isn't
prediction?
any prediction. Could it be disorderly?
The universe?
Yeah.
Yeah, if the universe was disorderly, that would falsify the claim.
Why? God could choose to make the universe disorderly, couldn't he?
Yeah, but if I say I would expect that, and it's not the case, that would
But I
falsify
could.
the claim.
There isn't
I
any
agree.
expectation. There isn't any on the hypothesis of God. There isn't any expectation that I could have that would falsify him because any he could do anything. God could make a disorderly universe if he wished to.
Yeah, but that's where I would resort to scripture on that. I would just say that the stars, like a scripture that says, the stars proclaim the glory of God, or the heavens proclaim the glory of God, and a disorderly universe would not proclaim the glory of God in any way. So
Well, I
I
don't
would
know
just say,
why. I would say a disorderly universe could proclaim the glory of God too.
how?
It would show his power.
It would show his power
I
that he
don't think
didn't
so.
order anything.
Yeah, that he can do anything. Even in a disorderly universe, there could be a God.
I feel
No,
like
no, he
maybe you're
You
can't.
could
No,
saying
just as easily.
contrary.
no, Brenda, Brenda. I think you might be confusing. God can do anything with omnipotence. There's some things God can't do.
God can't do anything that's logically contradictory, but a disorderly universe is not a logical contradiction.
God can't lie. Uh, there's an ATM just up here, Wendy. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hi. You still there, CC?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was looking at the chat. Sorry.
Oh,
Tony,
sorry. Yeah.
universe is pretty darn disorderly by any standard I can think of, but that could be my OCD. Yeah, I mean, I would just say that laws operate um, according to mathematical descriptions, and
No,
There,
they don't. No, they don't.
oh,
There are no laws. There are no laws. The laws
okay.
are descriptions. Laws
I
are
said
descriptions
I
of the
agree.
universe.
I
They
agree.
don't command. They don't command. And the
I agree.
universe doesn't obey laws.
I
We,
agree.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, I didn't say any of that. I said
okay.
that mathematical description. I can just say mathematical descriptions describe the laws of nature.
No, no, they describe nature. The laws are. We created the laws. We humans create the laws of nature.
We created the laws of nature.
Yes.
All we did was recognize the description.
No,
For example,
we create the description. It's
for
ours.
example, for example, if I dropped something and it didn't accelerate to the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared, then it would be a disorderly universe or a random universe. But because it operates according to that description, I would say it's orderly. Now you're saying, well, no, we just made up that description. What?
Yeah, it's a
How does that
description that's
follow?
attributed to. There's no logical contradiction in you letting go of something and it just sitting there and not falling.
I agree.
So
I think there's no logical contradiction, but I would just say that the fact that's my whole point, that it's orderly because it does follow those descriptions. I'm not saying that it's impossible that uniformity of nature doesn't hold tomorrow. I'm saying that the fact that that nature is uniform is the orderly part. That is the part that's orderly. That's what I'm getting at.
well, yeah, it seems to us to be,
Yeah,
as far as
exactly.
we know. We could be
Because like,
wrong. We
why
could be
doesn't?
wrong though.
Yeah,
We
but
could be
why don't?
wrong.
Yeah, but why don't milkshakes and TVs and houses just come into existence randomly? For example, why don't random things like that ever happen? It's just weird that things like that don't happen.
Well, maybe they do happen, but they're extraordinarily rare.
Yeah, well, I mean that could be the case,
Like once
but
every 100 trillion years or something.
yeah,
We don't know.
Does
that
it,
could be the case. But I just
guys,
but I don't see any evidence for it.
guys,
Right.
guys, guys, guys. There's a very good case to be made that that God made the universe in an orderly fashion, and it's this: it's that because we wouldn't be able to conduct the science experiments if we didn't have order in the
Yeah, I
natural
agree.
realm.
It does presuppose order, sure. But
Scientific experiments would be impossible because we assume the natural laws are going to be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So that
sure.
just reeks of order, doesn't it?
Yeah, but
Yeah, I
that's
agree. You
our
have to
assumption. That's
assume.
just that my entire point is that it's our assumption. It's not necessarily the case that the universe obeys that. It is simply our assumption, and it works well so far. But we could discover that there is a certain case in which it is not correct.
Yes, yes. Look, I agree with you, Brenda.
Yeah,
We could discover something in the future. Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, so
we're just
it's
we're
our
talking about what we.
description of our past experience, based on past experience, and based on the necessity of being able to make future testable predictions. But we could be wrong. We
But
could be
we're just
wrong.
talking about what we observe, and like we're talking about what we observe, all the evidence, and so forth. We're not talking about what could be possibly one day that we've never observed before,
It's
because we
really
can get
hard.
all. Hold on, I'm gonna mute you for a minute, Gavin, because we're getting a lot of background noise from you.
A lot of traffic noise. There's a lot
Yeah,
of traffic noise. Sorry,
sure.
and I'm looking up his nose too, which
Well, yeah. So I would say I'm wondering now, Brenda, because it seems like when I talked to you, you believed in objective morals, and then I talked to you again, and you didn't believe in objective morality, and it seemed like you've
yeah.
changed a few times, actually.
Well, that's
I'm just
I'm
wondering, what do you
not
believe now?
certain. I'm not certain
Sure,
always
sure.
of my beliefs, and they change based on the conversations that I have. Um, I'm sort of inclined to want there to be um, m- uh, moral morals, as we call them, that exist independent of my mind. I don't believe that there's any kind of moral realism, as I don't think that there are there's any ontology to morals. I don't think there's any substance of morals. But I think that it might be the case that morals exist independent of my beliefs. But whenever I read about it, I come away doubting that there are any kind of objective morals. So I'm making the distinction between the ontology of morals. I don't think there's any kind of substance. There's no stuff called morality that exists out there in the world. But I do think I have thought in the past that it's possible that something like morality could exist independent of my personal subjective beliefs. But whenever I try to read, professional stuff on this, I come away um, uh, uh, convinced that I'm probably wrong. But we shall see. Maybe if I learn more, then I can come away with a different view.
Sure. Well, I think I don't know. I think you have to have a starting point. So I know that a lot of people do that. They believe in objective morality sometimes, and then they move back into, depending on what you like, what your influences are. But um, I don't know. I find it hard to find any type of ought or even define moral progress if there is no objective morals. Because there's another problem that a lot of people don't think about. It's the problem between improvement and difference. You see, if I say it's wrong to murder, and you say it's not wrong to murder, are those claims? Is the claim that it's wrong to murder an improvement, or is it just a different claim?
Well, it's always wrong to murder because murder is simply defined in terms of it being wrong. Murder is simply an unjustified killing, right? It's like saying that there's a married bachelor. Bachelors are simply defined in terms of not being married, and murder is just defined in terms of being an unjustified killing of somebody.
No, I don't know if I can agree with that, because there are people that are fine with unjustified things like that. I wouldn't say it was wrong. They would just say it's different.
Oh, okay.
For example,
I
people.
don't know what that means, but okay.
Um, so like you might say, well, you can't just have faith in something without
Oh, we're just
evidence.
going to finish. Huh?
Like,
Yeah.
hang on. Um, so, for example, you might say, well, you can't just have faith in something with no evidence, and then somebody can say, because you
Yeah,
haven't
you can.
justified it.
Sure,
Well, well, let me
you can have
well,
faith
let
in
me
something
finish.
without evidence. Sure, you can.
All right, but let me finish. You might say, because you haven't justified your beliefs, and then they could go, I don't care about justifying my beliefs. It's
Yeah, a
just,
lot of people don't.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you could go,
Yeah.
well, murder is an unjustified killing, so it's always wrong. This defined as wrong, and they could go, no, there doesn't have to be a justification for
Do
for
you
for killing.
do you think there's
Uh,
such a thing as married bachelors?
no, but I think that's an actual contradiction. That's not mutually exclusive with the claim that murder is always wrong.
I think it is. I think they're exactly the same.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of people that disagree with you, because there's a lot of murderers out there that don't think it's wrong. You couldn't say there's a lot of married bachelors out there. That's an actual contradiction.
I can imagine somebody thinking that they are married, but they still think that they are not married. People can have all kinds of bizarre beliefs. Um,
Yeah, but you can't have a married bachelor. Somebody could believe something like that, but that you can't have a married bachelor.
um, yeah, so um, I think that murder is an analytic statement which expresses a definition that murder is simply any killing of another human being that is not justified. And I don't mean justified in the sense that I feel I have a right to do it. I mean, justified in the legal sense.
I feel like
And
you
that's
just
that's that's why we have courts of law to determine whether or not some act of killing somebody was justified or not. And it's the law that
sure, but
determines whether it was justified.
sure, but say that all the courts agree that it was not justified, and the person was shown to be wrong by everybody, and then the person goes, "I don't think it was wrong." It's just a
Yeah,
case of somebody
they'd be
disagreeing
wrong because they'd be wrong. They'd be wrong because they're not
objectively,
the.
or
Yeah, yes, they'd be objectively wrong.
okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, because
There
the
are
courts
objective morals.
yeah, that's not a moral. That's not morality. That's just
Okay, so
legality. That's just legality, not morality.
what? What are the laws for? You're saying that something can be morally can be um,
It's legalism. You're arguing for legalism.
no. I just asked you about a moral case, murder, and I said, is it
No,
morally right or wrong? And
no,
you're
we're
saying
asking about the legal case
I
of whether or
wasn't.
not.
I was talking
But
about morality.
that's what murder is a legal definition.
Okay, well, murder's in the Bible way before it was in the court of law in the United States.
Well, they had laws and they had courts,
I agree,
judges.
but I was asking about morality, and laws are typically for um, the judging of morality. So I'm saying,
No, they're not. Laws are about judgments of legal.
so humans just use laws to judge some type of legal standard without having anything to do with morality.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, so what are you saying? Because I only got like maybe another 15 minutes and I got to
Okay.
roll.
I'm saying that the prohibition against murder is an analytic statement in the same way that saying that bachelor is an unmarried man is a analytic statement that expresses a definition. It's definitionally true that married men, bachelors are unmarried men, and it's definitionally true that murder is an unjustified killing.
Okay, so would you say that the law is something like principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad behavior?
Not always, no. If I'm going 65 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, I'm not immoral. I've simply broken
Uh,
the law.
I just said that. Do you think that the law is principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good or bad
No,
behavior?
not always, not always. No, some of them might be, but not all of them.
Well, can you give me an example?
I just did.
You're,
Speeding.
yeah, you're
Speeding
saying you weren't
speeding
wrong,
is yeah, speeding is breaking the law, but it doesn't
right?
necessarily mean I'm immoral.
But doesn't mean you're wrong.
I'm sorry?
I didn't say anything about morality. I just said a principle concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good or bad behavior. So if you speed, or the law
Yeah,
is
I've broken the law, but I haven't necessarily committed an immoral act.
I didn't say anything about morality.
Yes, you
I said
did.
I said principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good or bad behavior.
Yeah.
There's no morality in that statement. It's
Yes, there is. Good and bad are moral claims.
okay. So now, but right and wrong aren't. You're saying
What?
right and wrong are not moral claims?
No, I said that they are. I
Oh, they
just
are.
did.
Because in your other analogy with murder, you said we know it's wrong, but it's just legal. It has nothing to do with morality.
The prohibition against murder is a legal
Okay,
issue.
well, that's a different claim because you said we know it's always wrong because it's defined that way as being wrong. So I would just say,
I don't know if I said. I don't know if that matters so much. It's always going to be the case that um, defining if murder is defined as unjustified killing, right? Then
okay,
it would always be the case that the committing murder is an unjustified is illegal. It's an illegal act. There might be cases where you could make the moral justification for committing an illegal act of murder. That might be
Um,
possible. That might be possible.
so typically, people will define murder as the something like premeditated killing, not necessarily unjustified. Now, sometimes it's unjustified, but murder just means something like premeditated killing. Um,
Um, well,
so,
manslaughter is in that category, isn't it? And manslaughter is it was when you're due to your negligence you cause somebody to die.
sure, but
So
what I'm saying,
if you're negligently operating a motor vehicle and you kill somebody, run over somebody on the sidewalk, you're guilty of manslaughter, but you wouldn't be guilty of murder because you didn't intentionally kill that person, but you're still guilty of violating the law.
I agree, but we were talking about morality, though. Let's try to. So
Yeah,
we're
that's why I
talking
tried
about
to avoid legalisms.
you're the one that brought it up. I didn't say anything about legalism. I just said that I took an example. We were talking about morality, and I said let's take an example, murder, for example. And you said, well, it's
Yeah,
always
it,
wrong because it's defined in such a way that it's unjustified and that everybody knows it's wrong. And I said, well, the murderer doesn't think it's wrong. And then I challenged your view on the definition of murder, meaning that it's always unjustified. And I said that it means something like premeditated. It might be against the law, but plenty of things are against the law and they're still moral. Like, for example, here's the definition of murder from the dictionary, and it says the unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being by another. And there's plenty of things that are unlawful that are still moral. And then
yeah.
there are
I've already conceded that. I've said that it's possible that um, uh, the premeditated killing of somebody could be a moral act.
okay, okay. So that was my point. Is that so? Murder in that sense isn't always wrong.
Right, but the Bible says it is.
Okay, so now we're finally getting to the moral conversation because before it was like
But that's not moral.
everybody knows
That's
murder is
legalism.
wrong.
That's just legalism. You're just saying it's wrong because the Bible says it's wrong.
No, no, I didn't.
Well, if it's based on some other criteria, then there are going to be cases in which it's moral to kill somebody. Like for instance, if God tells you, "Take thy son, thy only son,"
What
that
was
would
your
be
point?
moral. That would be moral. It was moral for Abraham to kill his son, right?
Abraham did not kill his son.
But he intended to.
What? Abraham, obviously, that story is a precursor to Jesus Christ and God giving his only son. And it was a prophecy, but also Abraham knew that God had already told him that your son, Isaac, is the promised child that will bear seed, will bear the seed that will be like the sands of the, if anybody could count the sand on the beach, or like he already knew Isaac is going
Um,
to reproduce.
the
And it was
fact
a
that
test to see if,
the fact that he didn't carry out the murder doesn't make it any less murder.
no, obviously it was a test. And it was to lend a prophecy to scripture. Um,
If God hadn't stayed Abraham's hand, would he have done something wrong?
would Abraham have done something wrong if God didn't stay his hand? According to human normative ethics, he would have done something wrong. But according to deontological ethics, he would have not.
Okay, that's what I mean.
That's what you mean. What?
I'm glad to hear that you're clear that if Abraham had plunged the knife into his son's heart and slayed him on the altar and burnt his body as an offering before God, that was a perfectly moral thing to do. Good to hear.
What?
Well, that's
I
what he was
said
supposed to do. He was supposed to kill his son
no.
on an altar,
You're,
and then
you are
offer him as a burnt offering to God. And you're saying that if God had not stayed his hand, he would have carried out those acts, and that would have been okay, according to deontological morality. Yeah,
It's incredible.
good to know.
It's just incredible.
What's incredible about that? You just assented to it just a second ago.
Just incredible, Brenda. I mean,
Well, what did I get wrong? What did I get wrong?
first of all, I like to take something like um like this example, which I told you was first of all a a prophecy fulfillment. It was a prophecy to be fulfilled by God giving His only Son, right? And that's what the story was used for. And the fact that Abraham knew that God had already promised him to make his son seed the entire more numerous than the stars in the sand. Um, to say that Abraham would have, knew that he was going to kill his son is just incredible because it's. Think about this. If you're saying that Abraham was going to do it, what I'm saying is that was never going to occur.
Oh, well, number one, it doesn't matter. As long as he had the intent to do it, he's still guilty. And number two, God said to Abraham, take thy son, thy only son, and offer him as a burnt offering before the Lord. And had God not stayed his hand, he would have carried out those instructions. And I'm asking, would that have been moral? And your answer was not according to normative ethics of humans, but according to your deontological ethics, it would have been okay. So I'm just taking you at your word. That
Yeah,
had
because deontological ethics do not concern result. They do not concern
right,
consequence. They concern rules.
right, and the rule is you obey
So,
God.
so according to deontological ethics, it doesn't matter. So
Yeah,
it
I understand. I understand.
doesn't
I'm
matter
agreeing
the
with
case.
you.
You can give any case.
Yes, I
You can
understand.
say if you move a rook the way that you should move a bishop, is it wrong? And then I would say yes, because that's not the way.
Yes,
Because according to the rules, that's
right,
not
and
the way you should do it.
right, and in your version of deontology, moving a rook is no different than murdering your son on an altar and offering him as a burnt offering before the Lord.
Not
There's no
me.
no difference. You
No, not
are.
me.
Yes, you are. You are assenting
No,
to that.
no. See, that's a facile analogy because
How?
you're taking a human who has never talked or met God
It's
in that
about the
way.
rule, not about
Wait a
the
second.
object of the rule. You said it's
Wait a
about
second.
the rule.
Wait a second. To take a human who has never experienced talking with God and walking with God and God making promises to him and seeing God and all of these things like Abraham did, to kill their son based on something they just heard in their head, like to a person who walked with God and sat down with God and talked with God and got promises from God and then had miracles done from God and God proven himself to him, and a person who says, you know God's proven himself to me, he's the
Yeah.
author of
I,
life,
yeah.
he's the author
Okay.
of death.
I
And
concede all
so
the.
yeah,
I
but
can
you said
give you. I
me.
can grant you. I can grant you all of that. I
Yeah,
can
you said
grant
it
you
would
that
be.
Abraham had a personal relationship with God. He walked and talked with God. He knew Him intimately. It wasn't just a voice in his head, right? He knew that God. This is the Creator of the universe, and the Creator of the universe said to him, "Take your son and offer him as a burnt offering before me." And you're saying that that is deontologically a morally praiseworthy thing to do.
If Abraham would have, yeah, if Abraham would have followed the rules the ethical rules, yes. So of the creator of the universe,
Yeah,
sure,
great,
yes.
great. It's good. Yes,
Are
thank
you
you,
claiming that
thank
that
you.
isn't ethical or what?
Yes, I am.
And by what standard?
By my standard,
By human
that
normative
it's
ethics? I
wrong.
already
That it's
said.
just
Wait a
wrong to
second.
kill somebody
That's the
and
taxi
burn
cab
them up
fallacy.
and burn them
Wait
up.
a second.
Yes, it's wrong.
That's the taxi cab fallacy. You said,
What
I
do you?
said by what standard? And you
There's
said
no
by
such thing
human.
as a.
Wait a second. Wait a second. You keep trying to talk over me. I said by what standard? And you said, oh, by my human normative standard. I already said it was
Yes.
wrong by that standard. You can't reappeal to it. Let's be. I mean, just think about it.
Yeah, I'm so silly.
I
You're right.
said,
I'm just crazy. I'm just crazy.
did I
I'm
say
way
that?
out there.
Did I
Woohoo, woohoo. I think that killing your own son and
say,
burning them up on an altar is bizarre. You're
did
right.
I
You're right.
not say that
Woohoo.
according to human
Crazy me.
normative standards?
Crazy Brenda. Crazy Brenda.
Why are you trying to overtalk me? Did I not say that according to human normative standards, it was wrong?
Yeah.
And then I said, by what standard do you think it's wrong? And you said, by human normative standards.
I think your deontological standards are monstrous.
I agreed with your standard, and I
No,
agree with
you
it
no.
wrong
I,
according to human normative standards.
I reject your deontology. I
That's
think it's monstrous. I think it's monstrous.
not according to what standard?
Uh, by my own human
Human
standards.
normative standards. I
Yes,
already agreed with that. You can't go back
yes.
to it.
Well, you don't agree with that. You think
I agree that
it would
according
be
to human
morally praiseworthy.
nope,
You,
uh, according to human normative standards, it's wrong.
but you would do it.
Nope, because I don't know that.
If you walked and talked with God, the Almighty God, Creator of the universe, it wasn't just a voice in your head, and He told you to take your son, your only son, and offer him as a burnt offering, you would do it.
I don't know if I would. Honestly, you guys might be out of luck. The same with God giving His only Son. If I had to give my only son,
So then, why are you
I
criticizing
think you
me
would be
for
out
something that you wouldn't do either?
because you're saying no. According to my human normative standards, it'd be wrong, and I go, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but so I think that the deontology that you're relating to me, where it is morally praiseworthy to obey the dictates of the Creator of the universe, I I don't agree. Even if I knew, here's a scenario. Here's a scenario. Even if I knew for a fact that there was a God and He walked and talked with me, He spoke to me, I
Hmm.
knew Him. I knew Him. It's not just a voice in my head. And He told me something to do something which went against my innate moral, humanistic, ethical precepts.
Hmm.
I would refuse. I would not obey.
See, I don't think that I'm much different because
So you
the
would
same
disobey you would disobey the creator of the universe if he told you to do something that you disagreed with.
I mean, I don't know because I've never been in that situation, but I would say more than likely, if I was asked to do that, I probably would disobey. Now you could just all you could say is, "Hey, look, uh, you're not a knight of faith like Abraham was." If you look at, for example, Fear and Trembling, written by Soren Kierkegaard, he contends with this, and he goes, "Look,
Yeah. It
uh,
doesn't
he goes, he talks about being a knight of infinite resignation and these other different categories that he says, and I would hope that I would follow what God says according, like if I
I
was
would
there,
hope you would I would hope you
I
would
know you,
disobey him.
I know according to human normative standards.
Yeah.
If yeah, but what I'm saying is, if I'm standing there with the creator of the universe and first of all, like if you even look at some of the narratives about people who are around, some of these figures, like like if I were just like pulled to the ground to where I could barely, like sit without, falling over. Uh, and I had that experience of awe, and I was tested to do something. Like I don't know if I would be able to, but at the same time, how could I possibly know what I would do in a situation like that?
Well, okay. Well, at the very least, it seems clear to me that you do not believe in objective morals.
How does that follow at all?
Because if you thought that morality was objective, you would do what God told you to do.
Not necessarily. People people don't follow God all the time. For example,
If you
the
don't
Bible
do what
says
God says, you're going to burn. You're going to
the
burn.
Bible says don't grieve the Spirit.
Yeah. But
If
God says take your son, offer him give him as a burnt offering before me, and if you don't, you're going to burn.
Yeah, I would say there's plenty of Christians that do wrong all the time, and that all they can do is ask
And
for forgiveness.
and
And
if you're saying that you don't think you would do it, I don't think that you believe
I don't
in
have
objective morality. I don't think you do.
that doesn't follow that I wouldn't believe in it. You can believe in objective morals and not follow an objective moral. For example, Christians do it
So
all
the
the
only
time.
difference between you and me, is that we would both not refuse to carry it out. I would just think that God was wrong for asking me to do that, and you would think He was in the right to do it, but both of us wouldn't do it. That's the only difference between us. Is that I think it would be wrong for God to order me to do that, and you think it would be all right. That's the only difference between us.
It would be wrong according to human normative standards,
Yeah,
but
you would think that it was right deontologically for God to give you that order. You would not, you as you've said here, you would not obey it, or you don't think you would
wait a
obey
second.
it.
You're saying
I
that it's
de-
wrong.
yeah,
Ask
I would say
you
that God, I
according
would
to
spit in His
what?
face. I would spit in His
I'm
face.
not. I don't disagree with that you would think you would do that if you could breathe around him, but I'm just saying, according to what standard do you believe it's wrong?
According to my internal humanist
Humanistic normative ethics.
ethical.
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
that doesn't
yes,
that doesn't get you anywhere. I've already
yes.
agreed.
It does. It does. It does get me
I've already
somewhere.
agreed. According to human
It
normative
gets. You
standards,
know
it's
what it
wrong.
gets me? You know what it gets me?
It gets you
I don't kill
to
my own
a
children I don't
self-centered.
kill my own children. That's what
It
it
gets
gets
you
me.
to a human-centered worldview of ethics.
Yeah, it gets me to I don't kill my own children. That's what it gets me.
It gets you to your so no. Because if you let's say that you didn't follow that, and your children and you and your children were to be destroyed anyway by the creator of the universe,
Oh
like
well.
you're not you're like I saved my children.
Yeah.
No, you
Oh
failed the
well.
test, and
I would go I would go to hell
I think
in
honestly,
the knowledge that I am more moral than the God who sent me there.
I think
That's
honestly
what I
that
would do.
that that people like you like to take a situation where um, Abraham, who didn't kill his son, who was never going to kill his son, uh, you like to take that situation and extrapolate to, well, that's the same as if some regular human today would do it.
Yeah, it
No, it's
is.
not.
I mean,
Not even close.
if I came across some husband, and he's in his
Let me ask you
apartment.
this.
I'm there for a party or something, and he's got a knife in his hand. His hand is moving down. I jump in, I leap in, and I grab his hand and prevent him from plunging the knife into his child. You know, he's still guilty. He's still guilty. It doesn't
Let me
matter
ask you
whether or not
this.
he actually does. It doesn't matter whether he
Say
actually
that.
completes the act or not. He's still guilty.
Say that you tell someone you cannot move your rook like a bishop. Okay? And somebody says, I think that's the most immoral thing I've ever heard. What do you say?
It's just it. I would say simply that it's not immoral. It's simply not constitutive of chess. If I don't
There you go.
what is constitutive of the game of chess is following the rules of chess. But I don't think that rule following is even moral. I don't think it makes you moral to play by the rules of chess. You could make up, and there are alternate games of based on the chess pieces. For instance, there's Chancellor chess where they add another piece called the Chancellor, or there's also other rules where the rules of movement are or other
We're not
rules,
talking about other
tournament
rules.
rules
We're
are
talking about
different. Are
standard
different.
rules of
There are
chess.
different types of chess. There are different types of chess.
Yeah, but I think that's just a red herring because we're just talking about regular chess.
Yeah, but it's not immoral. It's not immoral to not play a
Okay.
game of chess, or to have different rules.
So that's my whole point is
That would be my
if
argument against
chess,
deontology.
if in chess you can't move a rook the same as a bishop, and somebody says, "Well, I think it's immoral that you can't do that," then
Yeah, I
the
think
only
that's
thing
ridiculous. That's why I think that. That's why
it's
I
based
think that
on opinion. It's based on a human-centered point of view.
it's not
It
human
has nothing to
centered.
do with reality.
It's not human-centered or not. It's simply what is constitutive of playing chess is following the rules of chess, and that would be my argument against deontological morality, which is it's simply rule following.
Yes, but of course, but it's based on like so. If you don't, if it's not following the example of the person that created all things, for example, then it's based on just some uh, fickle, finite human
Uh,
understanding of
I
morality.
don't particularly care if I'm playing a game of chess with God and he doesn't follow the rules of chess. I'm going to get pissed at him and say, stop that. We're not playing chess. You need to move your rook in the proper way. Otherwise, we're not playing chess.
Yeah, but that's deontological.
Right.
That's not
Which
some. That's not a
yeah,
human
yeah, I
standard.
agree. So thank you for coming around to understanding that deontology is not morality. It's just
That's not what I agree with.
it's just
I
rule
didn't agree with that.
following.
I obviously didn't agree with that. I basically so basically you just said, well, if we're doing a deontol, if me and God are playing chess and it's deontological rules, then God doesn't follow them. I'm like, well, then that's not deontology. That's
What?
your standard of that's your human standard of morality.
Well, I wouldn't say it's moral or immoral. If I'm playing a game of chess with anybody, and they don't follow the rules or I don't follow the rules, I have not. It's not immoral that I don't follow the rules or that they don't follow the rules. That's not what morality is about. I don't think morality is about obedience to rules. I think morality is about right ways, how we ought to conduct ourselves, and how
How
best
do you
how
get
best
a
to
thought out of
construct.
subjective morality?
I'm sorry.
How do you get
Well, I
an
don't know that I'm not saying that I'm subjective, but I might be.
what?
So
So you don't believe
what?
in objective morality, but you're not subjective?
No, I'm saying that um, if I don't believe in deontology, right, then I could believe. I'm attracted to the idea that um, morality consists in is based on the consequences of our actions, right? So that what matters are the consequences that follow from it, from our actions, and so the
Consequentialism?
yeah, I think that might be, I, I think that might be
I think that's a
a
good
good way to
argument.
go. It might be. I mean, I don't know. For instance, like I've said, morality and meta ethics is an extremely broad and it's like a
I agree.
labyrinth.
I
It's
agree. I
like a
could be wrong
labyrinth,
about
and so
I could be wrong about deontological ethics
yeah. So
that I necessarily have. So a friend of mine who's an apologist, we disagree on this, and he says no, consequentialism is what the Bible teaches, and so
it,
I don't
I don't know.
so I don't
I'd have
necessarily.
to hear that argument. That might be interesting. Maybe you should have him on sometime to talk
Yeah,
about it because that might actually be interested. I'd be interested in hearing what he says because
yeah.
I'm not sure
So
that consequentialism is biblical, but it kind of
yeah,
seems to me,
so he
you know,
points to verses like this happened so that many will still be alive today and that kind of thing. So, but only thing I would say, like wrapping up because it's after 1 a.m. here,
yeah. I'm
so I got
sorry.
to get going.
It's only
But
12:30 a.m. here.
yeah, so I'm on the East Coast. But the only thing I would say is that you know, what is moral progress then? You know, and like with the consequentialist view, like my critique is something like, then why isn't utilitarian ethics the um, the main why doesn't it win the day? Because if you're talking about consequences, a utilitarian would say, well, look, if we just kill 1 million people, we could save 20 million or more people. It's a consequential thing. It's like the
Yeah.
consequences of killing 1 million people is saving 20 million. It's like,
Yeah, maybe if I were an impersonal, artificial intelligent AI, an alien AI, I might think that with 7 billion people on this planet, it might be a good thing to thin the herd a little bit. But I would never do that as a human being. Um, yeah,
yeah, so that's what I'm saying is is it the
But
wrong thing to kill 1 million people to save 20 million? And you go,
well,
well, yeah,
Thanos did nothing wrong, you know.
yeah, that's completely beside the point. But you get what I'm saying is your whole argument against deontological ethics in that scenario was it was wrong. And then what I say is, well, hang on. According to consequentialism, if is it wrong to kill 1 million people to save
Well,
20 million people?
I don't think it's helpful. What I think is helpful, what I think is since I think that morality are is rules for right living, for how to construct a society that is leads to the full flourishing of human beings, and I think that that is what accounts for moral progress. As we have continued as human beings, we have discovered that owning slaves does not lead to the full flourishing of human beings, but there is no reason necessarily or logically why I should choose to desire the full flourishing of human beings. But
Yeah,
on that, if I assume that, if I grant that
right.
morality would be about full flourishing, then I could
Flourishing.
grant moral progress as we discover more
Yeah,
and more things that help us to get along together better and better.
yeah.
But I don't think that that's moral. That's objective. I think it might. Well, it might be. It might be in a way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so that's the thing is I mean you're like if I base morality on flourishing, then I can get here from there. But it's just like I mean that's not an objective standard, obviously. I mean, and if I and would you say that let's say a Marxist communist ruler were to say, look, we're gonna kill 1 million people, but we're gonna save, let's say, 100 million people. Okay, do you say that that person is wrong for doing that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't. In my experience or in my understanding, political extreme political ideologies, whether it's fascism or communism, leads to the death of many millions of people, and it's the belief that I am right, that I know what is right for everybody, whether it's fascistic or communistic or Maoist or whatever.
Mm,
That is what leads to lots and lots of people getting killed. And
right.
so
You didn't answer the question.
I kind of reject both ends of that spectrum. But I can see that you're wanting to take off. And so I
Yeah,
appreciate the conversation. I thought it was a good
sure. But
conversation.
I didn't get
It
an
was
answer to that
interesting. It
though.
was interesting. It's interesting to, and thank you very much
Right. But what
for
was
the
the
talk.
answer to that though?
What?
Did you think that
Well,
that person was wrong or not wrong? That's all I want to know.
yeah, I would really disagree because I don't think that he knows what he thinks he knows.
Was
Because
that is
somebody
that
who's a
person wrong or
communist
not wrong?
thinks that they know what is best for everybody. The same is true with fascists. Fascists think they know what is best for everybody. It's we need a strong man to, and everybody just needs to obey him. And in communism, we need this communist, and everybody just needs to obey what the Communist Party says. And I think they're both full of shit.
Okay. Well, appreciate you stopping by.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the conversation.
Yep.
It was very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.